I told you I'm at a funeral. How insensitive can you be? Don't ever call me again. My husband, Kenneth, who had left for his late boss's funeral, was already upset from the start and hung up on me without listening to a single word. I called back immediately, but an automated message told me his phone was off, leaving me at a loss. I never imagined he would treat me this horribly. It was unthinkable back when we first met. Our relationship had started to shift when he was promoted. With increased overtime and weekend work, it became impossible to find time for us as a couple. I wanted children, but it was impossible to even think of that in our situation. Swallowing my pride, I expressed my feelings to him, but every time, he ended up yelling at me. It got to the point where Kenneth couldn't stand hearing about children, and eventually served me with divorce papers. I've already filled out my part. I'm moving on with my life without you. Once we divorced, Kenneth was clearly set on enjoying life with his affair partner. If he's going to act that way, then I have my own plan. I'll keep the identity of the person who called me earlier a secret from him. If he found out, I know he'd be utterly shocked. Imagining his reaction brought a quiet smile to my face. My name is Leela. I'm 35 years old. I've had a career dream since I was a child. To achieve it, I studied at a career college in NY and landed a job when I was 20. It was related to my dream profession, so I saved up while studying for independence. After 8 fulfilling years, as planned, I finally reached my goal when I was 28. My job is one I can do anywhere with a computer, so I work freelance from my rented apartment, which doubles as my workspace. However, with one goal achieved, I couldn't help but see another on the horizon. Friends from school were already married or mothers by the time they were 30, embracing the role of wife or mom. Meanwhile, I had spent my 20s so immersed in work that my life became a routine of home and office. After going freelance, I rarely left home, and with my days and nights often reversed, I realized just how few men I'd met. I held on to the ideal of having both a career and a family, so when my work finally slowed down, I decided to join a matchmaking service. That's where I met Kenneth, who would later become my husband. Kenneth, 3 years older than me, had also focused on his work for over a decade, and despite his friendly personality, he hadn't met many people. For Kenneth, working at a company, my freelance career was unique, and he was curious about me from our first meeting. "You're self-employed. That's amazing. What kind of work do you do?" "Well, I'm still starting out. I'd say I'm in illustration," I replied vaguely to his question, hesitating to go into detail, but I admired his thoughtfulness when he didn't press further. After several dates, Kenneth suddenly shared the name of the company he worked for. Recently, I was surprised to learn that the company Kenneth had just joined was in the same industry as mine. However, since Kenneth's department primarily handles advertising and promotion, he isn't engaged in the creative side of things like I am. He's a smooth talker, so it makes sense that a role like that suits him well. With a shared topic to bond over, we found ourselves never running out of things to talk about on dates. And before long, we both realized we had developed feelings for each other. Our relationship progressed naturally, with Kenneth leading the way, and we eventually married when I was 33. We started our newlywed life together in my old apartment, with him moving in to join me. My work had been going smoothly even before marriage, and the number of projects I received from clients increased, keeping me busier than ever. Since my work is project-based, I often find myself working around the clock, especially as deadlines approach. He was really understanding and never complained, quietly supporting me without expecting anything in return. Grateful to him, I tried to make time for us, ensuring we had meals together and spent our evenings side by side as much as possible. However, after he received a promotion at work, our relationship began to change. Promotions at his age were unusual in that company, so we were both initially proud. Now responsible for handling major deals and managing his own team, Kenneth's work hours grew longer, with overtime and weekend shifts making it difficult for us to spend quality time together. On top of that, he stopped doing his share of the chores, and a burden on me increased as I worked from home. My dissatisfaction and fatigue gradually built up. After 2 years of marriage, our schedules barely overlapped. Conversations became rare, meals together even rarer. We no longer shared a bedroom, eventually sleeping in separate rooms. I understood it was due to work, but with no intimacy between us, I started to worry. At my age, I felt ready to move to the next stage. One morning, after finally finding some time with Kenneth, I mustered the courage to share my feelings. "Hey, Kenneth, we haven't done that in a long time, have we? I know we're both busy with work, but how about tonight? Give me a break. I work late every day, and I'm at my limit. I don't have the time or energy for that, but I want us to have children. I'm over 35, which is considered a high-risk age, and I'm starting to feel uneasy. How am I supposed to think about kids? Unless you're planning on doing all the household chores and raising the kid, don't expect anything from me." This conversation is over. After a heated argument, Kenneth stormed out in frustration. Before marriage, we used to discuss our future, and he had mentioned wanting kids too. Has his demanding job changed his mind? Stunned and heartbroken, I knew I couldn't just give up. Despite my attempts to bring up the topic again, he refused to engage each time. Eventually, he began avoiding me, locking himself in his room or even leaving the house when he saw me. Our silent conflict dragged on for some time until he finally made a move. Seeing the papers on the dining table, I was speechless. Kenneth said, "This is the divorce application. I've already filled out my part. I'm tired of only hearing about kids. I want to move on and start a new life without you." He threatened to divorce me. It was so sudden that I couldn't process it. Before I knew it, I was clinging to Kenneth, crying, "I'm sorry, I didn't consider things enough. Please don't say anything about divorce." Meeting him felt like finally finding someone who understood me after a long time. Even if we barely have time together as a couple, I love him. I can't even think of divorce. Watching me apologize, he hesitated for a moment and then withdrew the divorce application. But from that day on, whenever we argued or he wasn't pleased, he'd bring up divorce to threaten me. At the same time, his demands started escalating. Not only did I end up doing all the household chores that we used to share, but I even became responsible for all his personal needs. He stopped contributing his share of the living expenses. Confused by this drastic change in him, I held on desperately, accepting this life to avoid divorce. Then, 6 months later, he started frequently leaving home on weekends and stopped talking to me. At the same time, my job became even more demanding, and the pressure of having to keep up with housework perfectly wore me down day by day. The day ended in a blink, with me struggling to get enough sleep. One day, while preparing dinner, Kenneth came home unusually early, without working overtime. Even though we live in the same house, it felt like meeting someone I hadn't seen in ages. Mr. Hernandez passed away, so I'll attend his funeral. Mr. Hernandez was Kenneth's boss. I remember him clearly because he attended our wedding. According to Kenneth, Mr. Hernandez was originally from LA, so the funeral would be held there. I'll be going with some of my colleagues from work, so I'll be gone for a few days. I see. Mr. Hernandez was very kind to me too. Maybe I should go with you. You don't need to come. I mean, no offense to Mr. Hernandez, but it's part of a work trip as well, so it would be inconvenient if you tagged along. I'll pack my things and leave soon. But you're busy with work too, right, Leela? I'll pay my respects to Mr. Hernandez, so while I'm gone, make sure the house is spotless. If I come back to a messy house, you know what will happen next. Since I can work from anywhere with my laptop, I kept insisting on going to Mr. Hernandez's funeral, but he refused. In the end, he got annoyed and yelled, storming out in frustration. His insistence on keeping me at home felt strange, and that strange feeling turned into certainty with a phone call. The day after he left, the home phone rang. I had set it up for work, but mostly communicated with clients via email, so it rarely rang. Thinking it was unusual, I picked it up, and I was shocked by the unexpected caller. Hello, this is Hernandez from UN Create. It's been a while, Leela. What, Mr. Hernandez? Yes, is Kenneth available? The caller was none other than Mr. Hernandez himself, who was supposed to have passed away. Kenneth was supposedly attending his funeral at this very moment. So what on earth was going on? My shock was evident, and Mr. Hernandez sounded puzzled by my reaction. Feeling confused but realizing the urgency of a call like this to our home, I decided to go along with Mr. Hernandez's conversation. I'm sorry, my husband left yesterday, saying he had a business trip. He mentioned he wouldn't be back for a few days. Is that so? Actually, it seems he accidentally took an important document with him today. We're on the brink of a major contract, and without that document, we're in serious trouble. We've been trying to reach his work phone repeatedly, but it's off. When we checked with the office, they confirmed this was the home contact number. My apologies. Let me call him directly on his cell. Could you please wait just a moment? Thank you. We'll be waiting for your call back. After the call with Mr. Hernandez ended, still not fully understanding the situation, I quickly dialed Kenneth's number. Whether he hadn't noticed or was deliberately ignoring it, he wasn't picking up at all despite the multiple calls. I had my own questions, but right now, preventing any more inconvenience to his company was clearly more critical. I kept calling him repeatedly, refusing to give up. After about 10 minutes, Kenneth finally answered. Hello, Kenneth. Can I talk to you for a moment? I told you I'm at a funeral. How insensitive can you be? Don't ever call me again. He was angry from the start and hung up the phone without listening to a word I said. I immediately called him back, but the automated message said his phone was turned off, just like his work phone, leaving me feeling completely lost. I decided to call Mr. Hernandez back to explain that I couldn't get through to him, and he candidly shared more information. Actually, he told us there was a family emergency and requested a few days off starting today. Looks like he told Leela it was a business trip instead. Yes, and he also lied to me, saying he was going to LA to attend Mr. Hernandez's funeral. My funeral? I mean, sure, I'm originally from LA, but I'm very much alive. What kind of lie is that? Since we're at this point, would you like me to share everything with Leela? Mr. Hernandez seemed genuinely furious, angry that Kenneth would not only lie but also inconvenience the company by pretending he was dead. Fuming, Mr. Hernandez assured me he would disclose everything he knew, encouraging me to prepare myself as he began unveiling Kenneth's secrets. According to Mr. Hernandez, A rumor about him had been circulating around the office. It seemed that since his promotion 2 years ago, where he started managing subordinates, Kenneth had been showing favoritism toward a young female employee. In reality, Kenneth hardly worked any overtime or weekend shifts. He kept regular hours and left work around the same time she did each day. Apparently, his current time off even overlapped with hers. At first, it seemed coincidental since she'd requested extended vacation days ahead of time, and Kenneth applied for bereavement leave afterward. But our phone call revealed it was all a lie. UN Create's president is known for his strong stance on trustworthiness with clients and won't tolerate anything that could harm the company's reputation. When any inappropriate behavior has surfaced within the company, he's dealt with it swiftly. However, in Kenneth's case, they were struggling due to the lack of concrete evidence. Apologies for discussing Kenneth like this. It must be hard for you, Leela. No, I appreciate you being open with me. Actually, I already knew it. What? Yes, I had suspected him of cheating. The turning point was when Kenneth started having me take care of all his personal errands. One day, as I was about to send his suit to the dry cleaners, I checked the pockets and found a receipt from a high-end restaurant. It was listed for 2 people, and I quickly realized Kenneth had taken someone there to impress them. Not wanting to believe he was cheating, I bought a GPS tracker to monitor his movements. Since I often stayed up late after he'd gone to bed, it was easy to slip it into his bag without him noticing. Tracking his locations revealed that after work, he frequently visited a motel or the same apartment. Even on weekends, he'd take day trips to nearby tourist spots and hot springs. Those were places we used to go on dates. I was devastated. Did my insistence on talking about having children drive him to cheat? But when I thought about it, our time together had already dwindled long before I brought up kids. The relationship must have started well before my attempts to discuss our family. I couldn't hide my shock, and it became impossible to focus on work. Realizing that this situation couldn't continue, I decided to take a decisive step and hired a detective agency just the other day, spending a significant amount of money for a thorough investigation. Today, it's likely that the investigator is following him as planned. Mr. Hernandez, though taken aback by my decision, agreed that Kenneth's infidelity was almost certain. The infidelity, the embarrassment to the company, the blatant disrespect towards Mr. Hernandez. I was overwhelmed by disgust for everything Kenneth had done, and any affection I once had for him drained away in an instant. The weight of all the efforts I had made over the years suddenly came crashing down, and I found myself slumping my shoulders under its heavy burden. There was no hesitation. I was going to get a divorce. A few nights later, my smartphone rang with an incoming call from Kenneth. At first, I ignored it, but as the calls persisted, I moved to a quieter area and finally pressed the answer button. Hey, where are you right now? Where? At a business hotel, of course. Why, I came home, and you're not there. The place is completely empty. What the hell is going on? After speaking with Mr. Hernandez, I had started preparing to leave the house. Since it was an apartment I had lived in long before our marriage, nearly all the furniture and appliances had been purchased with my own money. I arranged to have everything moved to a rented storage unit before I finally left the house. In a business hotel, I could count on a steady internet connection, making it comfortable not only for work, but surprisingly even more relaxing without the burdens of household responsibilities. I decided that I couldn't keep living with you anymore, so I left. And to make things easier for you, I went ahead and filed the divorce papers. So don't worry about it. Kenneth, sounding increasingly desperate, You filed the divorce papers. You've got to be kidding. While clearing out the house, I had come across the divorce papers he had already filled out. I figured there was no point in having a confrontation with him, so I completed my part and submitted it at the city hall, hoping to avoid unnecessary complications. Kenneth was obviously panicking, but I played along, pretending not to notice. What the hell do you think you're doing? I never thought of actually getting divorced. Wasn't that what you've always wanted? Or was that divorce paper just a tool to make me obey you? No, I didn't mean that. That doesn't matter. Lying about Mr. Hernandez's funeral was an outright disgrace. To lie like that about a boss who's shown you nothing but support. It's beyond rude. It's not a lie. I went to his funeral. Don't make baseless accusations. Who's making things up here? I got a call from him because he couldn't reach you. You might want to turn your phone on if you haven't already. You probably have a mountain of missed calls, all from a very angry boss. Realizing I had been in contact with Mr. Hernandez, his panic was evident, even over the phone. His response was pathetic. He scrambled to make excuses, claiming that it was some other Mr. Hernandez who had passed away, offering nonsensical explanations in his desperate attempts to justify himself. What a pitiful man. I realized I had failed to see his true nature before we married. The matchmaking service itself wasn't to blame. After all, there are plenty of couples who meet through such services and go on to live happily. I couldn't even recognize that I'd drawn the short straw, and in my excitement over meeting him, I completely overlooked the essentials. Kenneth, this is where it ends. I know exactly what you've been up to these past few days. And you'd better brace yourself. Your company will likely take some serious action soon. What are you even talking about? The company loves me. There's no issue. I get promoted young for a reason. Besides, as a freelancer, you'll probably struggle without me. Apologize now, and I might forgive you. I have nothing to apologize for. I'd rather not see you anymore, so from now on, let's handle this through our lawyers. And don't ever try to contact me again. Kenneth acted so defiant, clinging to an attitude of strength despite being completely cornered. With a heavy sigh, I ignored whatever he tried to say next and hung up the phone. He kept calling repeatedly, but I dismissed every single call until I finally powered off my phone. A month after the chaos, on a work assignment, I visited a company located in one of the office buildings. As I waited in front of the entrance marked UN Creating for my meeting, Kenneth suddenly burst out of the door, out of breath. Leela, what are you doing here? My face instinctively twisted with annoyance. Apparently, he saw me on the security camera at the entrance and came running out. It's all your fault that I got demoted, my salary's cut, and this is the worst. What do you have to say for yourself? He blocked my way, ranting on and on. With a month of no contact between us, it seemed his complaints had piled up. The demotion was his own doing, yet somehow he managed to blame it on someone else. I brushed him off nonchalantly, which only fueled his anger more. I would have preferred not to see him, but today was too important, so I had no choice but to come here. Just when things felt unbearably awkward, my meeting contact finally emerged from inside. What's all this ruckus? Have some decency outside the company. Mr. Hernandez. Why are you here? Why? Because I was the one who set up today's appointment with your ex-wife. He apologized for making me wait, and then motioned for us to head to the meeting room. Kenneth stood there in shock, unable to believe it. No way. Leela, you're actually that close with Mr. Hernandez. You didn't know. She's actually the savior of our company. Mr. Hernandez. You always say that, but really, I'm starting to get embarrassed. Actually, my work is as a creator specializing in game character design. Create is a game production company, and I've been connected with them since I first went freelance. Create once faced a deficit, and in a last-ditch effort to revitalize the company, they decided to develop a new smartphone game, outsourcing character design to me. The game was titled Puzzle Trouble*. It's a puzzle-solving game where players also resolve the various issues faced by the characters within the story. When Puzzle Trouble* was completed and released, it turned into a huge hit. Not only did Create bounce back, but they also expanded significantly. The reviews praised not only the engaging game mechanics, but also the depth of the characters. And because of that, I eventually became known among the staff as their savior. After that, Puzzle Trouble became a series, with new characters added in every installment that we released every few years. I have been the one writing all the characters, though only the CEO, Mr. Hernandez, a few other executives, and some developers actually know I work here. I met Kenneth after the first game became a hit, and he told me before we got married that he worked for Create. However, due to our non-disclosure agreements, I couldn't reveal that I was working on this project, and since I worked under a pseudonym, I managed to keep it all a secret. To silence Kenneth, Mr. Hernandez went ahead and revealed my true identity. Kenneth's face turned pale, and his mouth moved as if he wanted to say something. Puzzle Trouble is one of our main titles, and to think that Leela was involved. You were only hired after the first game became a success, and you've always been in the advertising department, so it's natural you wouldn't know the details of game development. Mr. Hernandez continued to reprimand Kenneth, pointing out how he had lied about needing time off for a funeral and had taken important documents with him, only to become unreachable. Apparently, Kenneth had mistakenly taken those papers with him and had flown all the way to LA with them. In the end, the documents had to be recreated in a rush to meet the contract deadline, and I later heard from Mr. Hernandez that Kenneth was demoted because he'd inconvenienced so many employees. I hadn't told you, thinking it might hurt your pride, but your early promotion was also thanks to Leela. The CEO was considerate because you were the spouse of the company's savior. No way, Mr. Hernandez. The time for the appointment is approaching. Indeed, the CEO is eagerly awaiting our arrival, so let's proceed. Before starting the development of the latest release, the CEO insisted on expressing his gratitude to me, which is why I'm here today. Kenneth, who had looked down on me, now seemed stunned, standing there in a daze after learning my true identity. Oh, and since everything is ready now, I'll leave the rest to you. Before heading to the back of the room, I took an envelope containing some documents out of my bag to hit Kenneth with one last blow. Inside, there was a collection of evidence gathered by the detective agency, proof of infidelity. Since I was planning to go to the lawyer's office afterward, it was convenient to have it on hand. When I handed Kenneth the demand for compensation in the divorce case, he clutched his head, stammering inaudibly, and collapsed to his knees. Watching him, I thought distantly, it looks just like a scene from a puzzle game. 1 year after the divorce from Kenneth and his affair partner had finally finished paying off the settlement in installments, and as I looked at my bank statement, I felt a sense of relief. Now I could finally cut ties with him for good. When I called Mr. Hernandez to thank him, a voice filled with relief greeted me. Then he told me that his affair partner had been fired from the company with disciplinary action. Their misconduct had spread through the office after I presented evidence of their affair, even reaching the CEO's ears. Immediate action might have been expected, but the CEO seemed to think it was better not to delay payments for my divorce settlement and gave a 1-year reprieve before finally dismissing her. I had canceled my apartment lease and kicked Kenneth out of the house, so now the two of them, left without money or a place to stay, were struggling to find any work and were wandering aimlessly. Create went public last month, so if they had continued working diligently, they could have been living comfortably by now. You brought this on yourself. I don't feel an ounce of sympathy. With the divorce behind me, I decided to leave NY and move to LA. In this town, time seems to flow slower somehow. Being here made me realize that I had been pushing myself to get to the next stage, rushing through life unconsciously. When my heart feels weary, the blue ocean soothes me, making me feel at peace. So, how's it going with the person I introduced you to? Mr. Hernandez's teasing voice came through the phone, making me blush. When I consulted Mr. Hernandez about moving to LA, he suggested I reach out to a distant relative in the area and introduced me to a man of the same generation. Wrapped in his gentle nature, I live a peaceful daily life, focusing on the work I love.
Breaking a bone isn't a big deal. If you're my wife, be here in 3 minutes.
While I was in the hospital, my husband insisted that I attend Samantha's wedding. He showed zero concern for my well-being. I finally confronted him, saying,
"As of now, I quit being your wife." "What?"
Caught off guard, he let out a gasp. "This is my chance." I started my counterattack. "I'll make him regret ever looking down on me. My name is Rachel, I'm 28. I have an older brother, Alexander, who is 4 years older than me. Both my parents are gone. They passed away when I was in middle school. At the time, Alexander was in high school. He dropped out to support me and got to work. I remember him juggling multiple part-time jobs. Alexander has been working at a certain company for about 10 years now. He was directly scouted by Joseph, the company's CEO, who valued Alexander's character. Alexander often mentions Joseph. He seems to have a deep respect for him, almost like a father figure. Joseph's nephew, Brian, was introduced to me 2 years ago. Alexander came home from work one day and said,
"Joseph wants to introduce his nephew to you. What do you think?"
I wasn't seeing anyone at the time, so I quickly accepted the offer. I thought, if it's the nephew of Joseph, whom Alexander trusts, he must be a good person. Having a boyfriend would put Alexander at ease, especially if it's Joseph's nephew. 2 weeks later, I was introduced to Brian. After a few dinner dates, he asked me to be his girlfriend. He was friendly, considerate, and adored his own sister. He reminded me of Alexander, and I immediately liked him. I agreed on the spot and began dating Brian. After a year of dating, we tied the knot. But 6 months into the marriage, I saw Brian's true colors.
"Samantha is coming back home."
Brian excitedly told me this a month ago. Samantha is Brian's sister, making her my sister-in-law. She had been living alone in the neighboring state but decided to move back home until her wedding day. Brian's family home is only about a 15-minute walk from our house. Thrilled about his sister's return, Brian was in high spirits. The night before Samantha was set to move in with her in-laws, Brian suddenly said this:
"Samantha is coming home tomorrow. Get everything ready to welcome her."
I left my job to focus on homemaking after we got married. So, I get that handling the household chores is my responsibility. Even so, I was slightly irked by the commanding tone in Brian's voice. Why the rush? I'm sure Samantha's parents are also excited for her return. Can't she come some other time?
"Samantha comes first for me. I married you to have you serve her. Now you can finally fulfill that role, so get to work."
I was speechless. Brian continued,
"Don't you dare complain to Alexander. If I ask Joseph, he can fire your precious Alexander in no time. You can't be serious. Do as you're told, and you won't have to worry. Got it?
I was devastated by his thinly veiled threat. Samantha, true to Brian's word, treated me like a servant. If I so much as frowned, she'd say,
"I'll tell Joseph,"
and smirk along with Brian. I had no choice but to comply. She treated me like a slave and occasionally demanded money. I drew the line there, but Samantha smugly retorted,
"Brian said, if you need money, ask Rachel. So, cough it up. Otherwise, I'll tell Joseph you were mean to me."
I was at my wit's end. I withdrew some savings I'd built up before marriage and gave them to Samantha. I didn't want to be a burden to Alexander, who had always supported me. The only option left was to obey Brian and Samantha. The only glimmer of hope was that Samantha's stay at my in-laws was temporary. She's set to get officially married the day after the wedding ceremony, and then they'll move to a new home in a different state. Until then, I have to hang on. That's what I kept telling myself to get through each day. One evening, just 3 days away from Samantha's wedding, Brian came home from work and dropped a bombshell.
"Prepare $10,000 as a wedding gift for Samantha." What?
I couldn't help but blurt out in a voice tinged with shock and anger. Brian turned toward me, wearing a displeased expression.
"Look, I don't mind if you don't want to, but if you don't listen, we're getting a divorce. And your brother's job is done for."
I was speechless, stunned by the threat of divorce from my husband. Before I could say anything, Brian doubled down. "Hey, I can divorce you anytime, you know." And with that, he waved a signed divorce paper in front of me. In a fit of frustration, I snatched the paper away from him. I shot him a piercing glare, but he remained defiant.
"Go ahead, make my day. Divorce me, and you and your brother are doomed."
Hopeless, I felt cornered. I stormed out of the house, aimlessly wandering the nighttime streets. Why did it come to this? Devastated, mentally and physically, I felt completely lost. While attempting to descend a pedestrian bridge, my foot slipped.
Ah!
Before I could scream, I tumbled down to the ground below. I passed out as I hit the cold pavement. When I came to, I found myself in a hospital bed. Where am I? My brother Alexander peered into my face, full of concern.
"Rachel, are you all right?"
I was utterly confused. Observing my condition, Alexander explained what had happened. Last night, a passerby found me collapsed under the pedestrian bridge and called an ambulance. I had fractured my leg and would need a significant time to fully recover. I was even told I'd require long-term hospitalization and rehab. Alexander looked at me intently after his explanation.
"Why were you out at that hour? Brian hasn't even visited you in the hospital. Did something happen between you two?"
I could feel Alexander's genuine concern. I broke down, unable to hold back any longer.
"He only married me to use me. He threatened to fire you, Alexander, if I don't obey. I wanted to protect you, but now he's demanding $10,000 for Samantha's wedding gift."
Alexander probably couldn't make heads or tails of my rambling. Even so, he nodded and simply said, "You've been through a lot." After a good cry, I began to regain some semblance of composure. Alexander was radiating an aura of anger. After hearing my whole story, he smiled gently at me.
"You didn't have to worry about me. What I can't stand is seeing Rachel hurting. But thanks for having my back."
He playfully tapped the top of my head. Despite being almost 30, it made me feel oddly secure. My phone rang right after I finished telling Alexander everything. It was a message from Brian.
"Hospitalized, huh? Don't think that's getting you out of our wedding gift. Have a 10K ready, and come back now. Tomorrow's Samantha's wedding."
He's always so concerned about Samantha, not a care about my health. Something inside me snapped. Enough is enough. I'm not putting up with this man anymore. That day I left home, I took my wallet, phone, and divorce papers. I spread the divorce papers on the table and signed them without hesitation. Alexander offered to submit the papers for me. He also updated Joseph on the situation. Fortunately, Joseph wasn't as concerned as I thought he would be. Now, I can finally stand up to him. The next day, I answered one of Brian's ignored calls.
Don't you dare ignore me!
The first thing out of his mouth was a shout. He was visibly angry. Brian raised his voice without even waiting for my reply.
You planning on skipping Samantha's wedding? A fracture isn't that big a deal. Get over here in 3 minutes. And bring the gift money.
I just quit being your wife.
What?
Caught off guard, he was speechless.
What do you mean? Quit the nonsense and get over here. Or else I'll tell Joseph.
I'm simply stating facts. We're divorced now. So, no wedding and no gift. Want to tell Joseph? Go ahead. Your threats don't work anymore. He didn't know Alexander had already informed Joseph. Brian tried another threat.
Don't mess around. Do you want Alexander to lose his job? Is that okay? After all he did for you?
Brian seemed a bit panicked, perhaps because I was unusually defiant. Staying silent all this time now seemed so foolish. I decided to clue him in. Alexander won't be fired. You will. Alexander already told Joseph you've been threatening me. Joseph is not happy with you.
That can't be. Joseph has been very fond of me. I was even fast-tracked into the company. There's no way he'd fire me.
Believe what you want. You'll find out soon enough. Are you at Samantha's venue? If you are, try finding Joseph. I bet you can't. Your little scheme with your sister has already been reported. There's no way. Joseph is livid. Not only is Brian getting fired, but Samantha's little scheme will also come to light. Have fun at the wedding. My ex-husband seemed incredulous at my words. Now that I have nothing to fear, there's no need for me to be intimidated by him anymore. When I raised my voice, Brian responded with a submissive tone. Poor big brother of yours. Quit high school just to support his sister, and now he'll lose his job because of that sister. You think an underdog like him can easily find another job? Even Alexander will start disliking you, you know? Don't call my brother an underdog. You're the real underdog here.
You sure you want to say that? I'm really going to fire him. Apologize now and bring me $1 million and you're off the hook. You're Samantha's personal servant, after all. Bring me the $1 million now.
I completely lost my cool with my condescending ex-husband. Forgetting I was in a hospital, I shouted into the phone.
The one who needs to apologize is you.
What? Stunned by my loud voice, I didn't hold back. I won't forgive you even if you apologize. You're definitely getting fired. And your wedding? I bet none of your family will even show up. Joseph's been talking to everyone, you know?
No way! Joseph wouldn't do that.
Well, they aren't at the venue, are they? Maybe it's time to realize you and your sister have been written off. The whole family's disgusted with you. Shame. Even Samantha probably won't forgive you. Hearing this, Brian let out a cry that almost sounded like a scream. And why shouldn't he? Losing his servant of a wife, alienated by family, and even potentially hated by his sister. He's got every reason to scream. I guess we're done here, I said to my ex, now presumably understanding the gravity of his situation. Enjoy your wedding, if it even happens. I hung up without waiting for Brian's response. After that, both Brian and Samantha called multiple times, but I ignored them. Eventually, they gave up and sent emails instead. Rachel, I was wrong. I won't call you a servant anymore. Please come back. Samantha's wedding will be ruined without you. Please attend and explain everything to Uncle.
Rachel, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. You don't have to bring $1 million. Just bring 10,000 and come right away. I won't be able to have the ceremony, let alone register our marriage.
They're still prioritizing their wedding at this point. I can only be flabbergasted at Samantha saying, 10,000 is fine. We're not family anymore.
I sent the same message back to both of them. More calls and emails came, but I didn't respond. Sometime later, Alexander came to my hospital room. Following him was Brian's uncle. As soon as Joseph locked eyes with me, he deeply bowed his head. My nephew really messed up. I'm truly sorry. I never thought he'd be such a person. Don't worry, it's not Joseph's fault. Keep your head up. I've fired Brian. From now on, both Brian and Samantha will get the cold shoulder from the entire family. I'll also talk to his father. I'm sure he'll discipline him. Is that so? Finally, it's over. Hearing Joseph's words, I felt relieved for the first time. Just as Joseph promised, Brian lost his job. Seems like his job hunt is struggling. He's never really looked for a job before. Samantha, who received pushback from all relatives, had her wedding canceled, just as expected. Not only was their wedding canceled, but they were also ordered to pay for the cancellation fees. They're now disowned by their parents and live in a cramped apartment with no one to turn to. Brian is blamed by Samantha almost daily, saying, "This is all your fault." What was supposed to be happy co-living with his beloved sister turned into daily agony for him. Serves them right. As for me, thanks to Joseph's offer, I'm now working at the same company as Alexander. We've resumed our life together, just the two of us, living freely without any family interference. From now on, I plan to live a good life, supporting each other with Alexander.